Thank you for watching the VIFF Short Forum, Program 3 at the 40th edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival. My name is Curtis Woloschuk. I'm the Associate Director of Programming at VIFF, and we're very excited to have several of the filmmakers responsible for the work you've just seen join us. From A Safe Distance, we have Gloria Mercer and Aidan West. From Defund, we have Khadijah, Roberts-Abdullah, and Araya, Mengesha. And from The Untouchable, we have Avazeh, Shahnavaz. Thank you all so much for joining us today and for sharing your work with us as well. These are all such fascinating films in their own respects. And looking at the top of my screen, it may be different for people at home. Gloria and Aidan, I wanted to maybe begin with A Safe Distance. It's a film that feels really rich in implication, and the power of the film kind of comes in what is not said, what's not shared. And I was wondering, in your conception of this piece, how you arrived at kind of what would be left on the screen and what would be left for the viewers to discern from the viewing experience.
I mean, one fact about this film is that it is a short that's conceived from a feature. So there were some things that came to it, and then there is sort of a backstory. But in terms of it being its own fully formed piece of art, I think we just had a lot of fun with seeing how these women, you know, clearly have been through something, just like affects the audience's expectations and affects our interpretation of their own conversations about things that are potentially, you know, everyday conversations like bodily autonomy and things like that, and just what the presence of an unknown violence can do to change those themes. So yeah, I don't know, Aidan, do you want to talk about how we decided what to put into the short?
Sure. I mean, I think I think that we ended up sort of stumbling into with that is that this short was initially a feature. There's a feature script that goes along with this, and this short was kind of intended to be a proof of concept of that feature. So I think a lot of the things that go unsaid are perhaps like more explicit in the longer version, but I think the short actually ends up being stronger in some ways because some of the things that in the longer version of the story become more explicit are more ambiguous, and there are a lot more things that are left unsaid. And I think it's just playing to the strength of the medium that you're telling the story in, and a lot of those changes happened from how to make a great short film is different from how you make like a great feature, and those changes I think are relevant to what was best suiting the medium we were making. Yeah,
it was a blessing to have the ambiguity in our situation. I think created tension, which is great. That's so blessing in disguise.
And if that is a film in which much goes unsaid, Defund is a film in which much is said. And I was really curious to know about how the two of you interact. I mean, we obviously see your interrelation, your interplay on screen, and curious to know like your writing process with this film. Does it mirror kind of what we see on screen in terms of just a lot of ideas being thrown at each other from disparate standpoints, or how do you manage to combine all this into a script initially and then find its way onto screen as well?
The dynamic of the twins in the film genuinely reflects the dynamic that Araya and I have as friends and as roommates. We've known each other for quite a few years, lived together for a number of those years, and we're both actors who self-tape a lot from home. We've worked together in that sense. So the writing process came quite naturally. I mean, it sounds a bit cliche to say, but it was really reminiscent of what was actually happening in our home at that time during the summer of 2020. And kind of always, up until yesterday, I was bursting out of my room to share something that I saw online with Araya. So that dynamic was quite naturally reflected from real life. So in terms of us writing the scenes, we thought about, once we conceptualized what it is that we wanted to explore in the film, we beat out certain moments. We separated and worked on some scenes individually, and then came back together and read those scenes together, or would work on certain scenes together as well. But yeah, it was very much a dynamic duo effort.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say beyond that. It's like, it's us, and I think we were able to like carve out all the plot points and scenes and like particular, aspects of what could be a very wide and large conversation fairly easily because of how fresh it was for both of us, that we really were just describing what we were experiencing in many ways. And then, our dynamic is not that far off from what you see in the film. So that stuff came together pretty easy.
I will now cross off all the questions I have about performance and how you discovered these characters. You get no credit for that, obviously. But I think it does strike myself as a viewer that the film really effectively bottles the outrage of the time it was made. And I imagine you had to employ some almost guerrilla techniques in terms of making this during the time it was shot as well, or it feels like it's really made with an urgency, not only with the issues that drive it, but also probably in the actual production of the film itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we shot the film in our apartment here in this house. It's like a 4-person skeleton team with the two of us, our DP and their partner, who was like operating as boom, grip, and every other
gaffer
possible role, and we all took turns. And then when we were out in the world, we were out in the world. So it was a very much guerrilla style shoot. And I think that, what really kicked this off was what was happening post George Floyd in many ways. And even the initial offer, I'm going to let Khadijah talk about how it came to us. But that was very much something's happening, let's do something.
Yeah, there was a sense of urgency from the very beginning. I think that as an individual, as a Black woman, I, was really emotionally responding to what was happening in the world, and like with the pandemic on top of that. And I was getting lots of messages from people throughout, the industry, friends, family, just checking in. And Jay Stevens, our director of photography, is someone that I had worked with on a couple other projects over the years. And at the height of the pandemic, and just as these protests were kicking off, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm a white cinematographer with a particular skill set and a bunch of equipment. If there's anything that you want to say as a Black artist, I'm here to shoot it for you." So that act, spurred the inspiration for this film. I had been ruminating on some things that I wanted to say, and was itching to make another short anyway. So it was all quite timely. And with Araya being my roommate and an artist who I respect and admire, I turned to him and asked him if he wanted to collaborate. And so the story was born.
Thank you so much. Avazeh, with the Untouchable, I know that you returned to Iran several years ago after studying in Toronto, and you said you drew your inspiration from the country and the people there. Wondering what was the initial idea, or maybe a story that you'd heard that kind of put your film in motion, that inspired it for this to be a story for you to tell?
I think I was 16 when I remember when I was 16, I was back in Iran. So I was coming back from high school, and I was sitting in my father's car, and he picked me up from the school, and I saw a lady who was coming on the street shouting at some specific cars and going back to the sidewalk. And it was repetition of that the question came to my mind, why she's doing this, why those particular cars that she goes and shout to them. And this remained in my mind. And then this is the initial sort of motivation, or something that I wanted to somehow, because it was questioned for me that why she was doing that. If she was around, I think, 50 years old, and at that time I was thinking why she was shouting at some particular cars. And the question that it came to my mind, maybe it was because there was a car accident or something that she lost a kid in that accident with that particular car or vehicle. But in this one, I somehow like changed that was the initial idea, sort of.
The film begins at such a high velocity as well. There's you feel almost as if the camera is just trying to keep pace with her. And I forget how long that opening shot is. It's I think 8 or 9 minutes almost. And was that as you continued to envision the film, what did you know you wanted to keep us in such close proximity with her for that long, just to really make us feel her emotional turmoil and to really immerse us in the scene?
Yeah, that's why me and the director of photography, Salar, we chose this style, which it was like having a steady cam instead of like having a tripod and setting everything. It was a steady cam and it was continuous shot. So the reason it was because to having more tension and having to be able to feel that person feeling, sort of, and the urgency of that moment, sort of.
We have two filmmaking duos, I suppose, on this conversation with you. And I'm just wondering for yourself, in your creative process in Iran, do you have a collective you work with, or like a regular group of collaborators? What is kind of your process for making your films there?
I do, but in this film, like this is my second short film, but in this film, all of them, they were new, sort of like the group. It was new, and I've been introduced to them, and they were great. I mean, what they did, it was amazing. Director of photography, he did amazing job, I guess, and also the cast also. But the girl who acted, the actress, she was in my previous film too. Nika, she was in my previous film.
For Aidan and Gloria, if I understand correctly, Gloria, you serve as writer and Aidan works as editor. Oh no, Aidan is writer, you are editor. I apologize. So yes, so there's the common prevailing theory that a film is written 3 times, on the page, and when being shot and when edited. I'm just wondering how much of you has involvement in the other side. So do you work with Aidan during the scripting process? And then Aidan, how involved are you in the cutting of the film?
It's so funny with this film because so to answer your question about writing, I like to think I was quite involved in terms of just Aidan wrote it. I do not claim any credit there, but I love workshopping it and talking about my own experiences, and those kind of work. Some of them work their way into the film, and some of them, and there's a lot of stuff that is obviously neither of our personal stories. In terms of editing, I mean, Aidan was really, you're always pretty involved because we both produced this, I directed it, I edited it, and then Aidan wrote it. So, but this film is funny because it was not a very, when I shot it, I wanted to try something different. So it's not a movie that's very editable. It's like, it's a lot of long durational shots. And frankly, as an editor, I was challenged by it, but in a good way. Like I wanted that challenge. And then it's like, so we showed it to people and we asked for notes. And in a certain sense, there was a limit on how much you could really cut it because of the way that it was shot. But I love that. Like it was so fun. And I think it speaks to the mood of the film and the vibe of the film. It has a very it has a pace that is intentional, and I don't know, Aidan, if you want to talk about what it's like giving notes on the edit or working with the edit.
I mean, like Gloria works in post professionally, and I feel like there was a time where I thought I knew how to edit, and I have not done it in years, and I certainly don't know how to do it anymore. So I think like I'm capable of like watching a cut and hopefully like giving thoughtful opinions on it, but the person who's behind the keyboard and actually like doing it is 100% Gloria. And kind of similarly, like with writing, like I'm the one who has the final draft file on my computer. Like my fingers type all the sentences, but Gloria like reads every draft and she has lots of notes, and we like take them into consideration, and I do probably all of them. And this is a film that like the initial conception of it was always done together. So even though I like wrote the script. Like the ideas that became the movie were all collaborated on initially before, we wrote fade in on page 1.
I mean, frankly, like we just made another short called Smoke Eater, which Aidan also wrote and I also directed and I'm cutting now. And when we make films, it is almost like finding out how not to talk about the movie when we're making the movie, because it's like we just throughout the whole process while it's being written, and then when we decide to shoot it and we're gearing up to shoot it, it's just like constant communication. I don't know. So it's almost finding the healthy boundary of like, okay, we can't just talk about the movie today, we have to talk about something else. So we're just both extremely involved in every portion of the process, even that we both have parts that we sink our teeth into more and are maybe, fortes, etc. But yeah.
You mentioned some of the longer shots in the film, and there's the one I really love. One of the characters says, could you look over there for a second? And the camera turns, the camera complies with the request. And I was wondering if that was a case where like kind of operating in this short form allowed you to perhaps be more playful with how you would approach some of these things or take some risks with elements like that as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned the pan. It's like multiple people. It's so funny when we were cutting the film, that's actually a polarizing camera move. Not in a big way, but people bump on that or they notice it at least. So yeah, to answer your question, like we shot this during the pandemic in a day, which for me was, and with a smaller crew, not a 4-person crew, but still not huge. Like I think there were only 12 of us, including cast. So it was a really small crew, and it was a hard day because, we shot a 7-minute short, but it was also, there was a lot of, in a sense, because it was smaller, there was more room to play. And we got to, Devin Scott is our DOP and he loves doing test shoots beforehand. So we got to go and test these shots. And the pan was something, I don't know, that I almost feel like the movie is built around that, because it sets the pace. Aidan has said that's the shot that tells the audience like what to expect in this film. And so, yeah, I think just in a way, the fact that we made this film for almost no money and during a pandemic let us really try new fun things. And yeah, and that was one of them. And
for Araya and Khadijah, there was I don't know, maybe there was just a time where it was more fashionable for like North American shorts to have like a bit of like a button to them or like a tidy conclusion. And I think that one of the really powerful things about Defund is that there is no closure to it. And it suggests as well that just because things are talked about all the time doesn't actually mean that there's necessarily a level of understanding that's achieved as well. Or these characters can be in constant kind of conversation, but maybe actually aren't in dialogue. And I'm just wondering how, now the film's finding its way into the world, do you find that the real conversations are starting to take hold around the film once people have seen it, and it really becomes a jumping off point for real dialogue?
It's a tough question because it's really like our experience with people having seen the film is usually recognition, where people like recognize aspects of the conversation, whether they, in terms of the conversation around defunding or, any real polarizing sort of hot topic word or idea. They can have either position, but like I think they recognize the necessity for like actually engaging in dialogue around these things. That's why we place them as twins who could be, as close as you could possibly be. Like they have a literal shared brain, and yet have different ideas about this word, this idea. I think that we're having conversation. I think we hope that what the film does is make sure that we're reminded that there is a conversation happening. It's very easy, especially in the midst of a pandemic, to have conversations like this come in waves and then sort of dissipate. And we saw this happen 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and then we're back here again. And so the idea is that this continues to stimulate a conversation that even if you don't necessarily know what the answer is, or more importantly, if you don't agree necessarily entirely with someone else that might be considered an ally to you, that you consider continuing a conversation together, that, the steps are always forward and not standing in place.
Yeah, there was a point when we were making the film where I considered whether or not it was a time capsule piece, and I, you know, had to snuff that idea immediately, because although it's shot at a really recognizable time, and I feel like 10, 5, even, you know, 2 years down the line, people, even today, people are still talking about 2020, right? And the reality is that the content of the film, outside of the pandemic, as far as Black Lives Matter goes, and, you know, this idea of protesting social issues, especially, I mean, what hits home to me as a Black woman, that's an ongoing conversation. And the reality is that the struggle that we're dealing with that we're, you know, highlighting in that film is something that has been going on for a really long time. And it's an unfortunate reality that it will persist for quite some time. And I think that our goal with this film, like you said, is to initiate conversation around it. And it truly does feel like that's, if not happening, you know, in our immediate circles, it's happening around the world.
Absolutely. I would just add that element of this, like, these are generational changes we're talking about, that, you know, that's why we have this, the displaced person, Patrick, no one knows his name, but we know his name, we like it, it's Patrick, in the park, to realize that while he's not a part of this current iteration of the conversation, he comes from and has a history of the previous iterations of it. And that we'll continue to have them, like Khadijah said. This is a big idea. What we're talking about is something that is systemic and born from the roots of everything in which, like, our country and our societies are built on. So we're not changing that tomorrow.
Yeah, the realities of systemic injustices is that they're never not relevant, regrettably.
Yeah.
Going back to the Untouchable, you spoke a little bit about Nika, your lead actress, and how you two had worked together on a previous short, and it is a really electrifying performance that she gives. She's just riveting on screen, and you've managed to create this kind of cauldron of chaos around her as well. Like the film feels like it could tilt off its axis at any point in time. And can you just speak a little bit about how maybe the conversations you had with her as an actor initially, and then how you created that atmosphere for her to be able to give that performance in, when you're kind of in this open street, you know, it's not the most controlled of environments, but yet it feels both chaotic and like wonderfully choreographed at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was in an open street, and it was actually crowded, the street. But because of pandemic on those days, it wasn't as crowded as it was always. So, but it was hard because it was also pandemic, and we had 100 extras on the set for like 3 days. Like the entire process was 6 days of shooting. And so we had like these 100 extras, and it was hard, sort of, but it was great experience. And also the talk that I had with the actor and actress. The actor, he actually played as a police role before, and so the police that I wanted him to be, it was a different police that he was in his previous film. So but he's very smart, and he knew what I wanted based on the script that he read. And for Nika, we had experience in my previous film, and like a year before shooting this film, I was talking about this film and the idea of this film with her, and I realized that she sort of had similar experience, something similar to this, and it was amazing for me because I didn't know. And then for me, it was like, okay, then probably you can act this role and be as this character. But also because we have spoke with some women who had this episode of going out who are currently in like detention or something, and we went there and we actually talked to them. Me and Nika, we both went there, and we talked about their experience, about why did you go on the street and shout and like this kind of thing. And some of them it was because of drug abuse kind of thing, many of them actually, but it was knowing the reason behind why they go on the street, because many of them they went on the street and they were naked actually. And we have like raw footage and like the mobile phone footage of people who were just filming them. They were walking around naked and everything like that. But for mine it wasn't naked, but yeah, this is how we realized what was the initial idea of going on the street. And this is how Nika and I spoke about it, and we realized what is the best to have this character, what kind of action she needs to do, and what kind of drug does she use at all. I mean, if she use any drugs, and what kind of drug. And yeah, it was like that. And for the police officer, as I mentioned, he played as a police officer before. He had some experience, and we talked about, and he is experienced. He played in, I don't know, more than 20 films. So he knew what I want. And yeah, the hardest thing to do was controlling the set, because it was on an open street. It was pandemic. We had like 100 extras and this kind of thing. It was a new experience for me, but it was a good experience too.
Well, I know that we're out of time, and I think all these films are remarkable experiences for people to watch. So we thank you all so much for sharing the work with us and sharing your insights into how they were made as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.